All right. If you missed number 1 or number 2, you should be watching this video. The way this is going to work is you will write down what I tell you to write down, the notes part, and then you're going to have some examples that I'm going to go through with you, and then you're going to have some questions that you need to answer on your own, and I will guide you through and tell you exactly what you need to write down. When you get done fixing all of the problems that you missed when you took the test, you'll turn them into me, and if you don't have what I want written down, then I'm going to send you back and say, hey, do it again. And this time, write down what I'm telling you to write down. So, if you miss number 2, you can go ahead and fast forward until all the problems are numbered up here at the top. So this is number 1. So you'll fast forward until you see a 2 up there, and then that's where you should start watching the video. All right? So right now, only people who missed number 1 should be watching this video. You need to pause it, and you need to write down everything that's written down on this page. All right, hopefully you have it written down. I'm going to go through some examples with you, so every example that I go through, you need to write down also. Whole numbers start at 0 and go up. Integers can be negative or positive, but again, there's no decimals. They're just negative or positive whole numbers. Rational is going to be wholes and integers. Fractions, decimals that repeat. You should write this in your notes. Repeat means it's going to have that bar above it. That bar means it repeats. Decimals that end would be like 0.25. It's just a decimal. It ends. It can be positive or negative. Doesn't matter. But a decimal that ends is rational. Irrational, if you ever see pi, pi is irrational. And decimals that do not end or repeat, those are irrational. So let's do some examples. I want you to write these examples in your notes. If I wanted to do the square root of 16, well, the first thing you should do with square roots is type them in your calculator. So the square root of 16 is actually 4. The square root of 16 is 4. Well, 4 is a whole number, and it would be an integer because it's positive. And if it's whole and an integer, it's also rational. So you need to have that written down on your paper. That's a great example. The square root of 16 is 4, and 4 is whole and an integer and rational. If I gave you negative 2/3, negative 2/3, that is a fraction. Fractions are rational. You need to write that example down. If I gave you negative square root of 25, well, again, square roots we need to type in that calculator. So negative square root of 25 is actually negative 5. Well, it's not whole because it's a negative, and whole numbers can't be negatives. But it is an integer because it's negative 5. And if it's an integer, it's also rational. All right, what if I gave you negative 2 pi? Well, if you ever see pi, pi is always irrational. It doesn't matter what number is with it. Pi is always irrational. What if I gave you negative square root of 63? Let's try that. Negative square root 63. Okay, so that's a super long decimal. It does not end, it does not repeat. So that means it's also going to be irrational. Doesn't end, doesn't repeat. What if I gave you 0.4? 0.4, it's a decimal, it ends. That means it is rational. What else could I give you? The number 0. The number 0 is whole. It is also an integer. And it is also rational. It's going to be all 3. What if I gave you 15/3? Ooh, this one's a tricky one. 15/3 is a fraction, which means it's rational, but I like to type them in my calculator. 15/3 is actually 5. 15/3 is 5. 5 would be a whole number and an integer and rational because it's positive. Okay, so you should have everything that I have written down on your notes. If you missed number 1, I want you to write down the 10 problems. I want you to classify them as whole, integer, rational, or irrational. And you can abbreviate just like I did on the notes page, but you need to write down all 10 problems. You need to write down what the answer is and write down all that apply like I did on the last page. So pause it, do 1 through 10. Also, if you missed number 1, I want you to write down what you think the correct answer should have been and why you missed it. Okay? So that's number 1. Once you get that done, you are done, and you can move on to the next problem that you missed. Or turn it into me if you didn't miss any more. If you missed number 2, you should be watching this page. Number 2. I want you to pause it and I want you to write down everything that's on this screen. Alright, so function means the x's cannot repeat. So let's go through some examples that you should already have written down. Your ordered pairs are always x and y. So the x's are always the first one. So my x's are 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. They did not repeat. 2, 3, 4, 5. That means it is a function. If they do not repeat, it is a function. All right, let's look at this one. -1, 0, 1, -1. It did repeat. That -1 repeated. I had -1 here and -1 here. So this one is not a function because the -1 repeated. The tables you should have copied down. Tables always go x and y. So all I care about are my x's. These right here. -1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Did not repeat. -1 and +1 are different. So this one is a function. This table, my x's are 3, 4, 5, 4, and 10. Well, yep, that 4 repeated. So this one is not a function. To tell with mappings, again, x's go in your first one, y's go in your second one. So you want to look, and every x can only have one arrow. So 1 has one arrow, 3 has one arrow, 5 has one arrow, 7 has one arrow. So this one is a function. Doesn't matter where the arrows go to, all that matters is that each number has one arrow. So let's look at this one. 3 has one arrow, 1 has one arrow, but 0 has 2 arrows. That means it is not a function. And then for graphs, you do something called a vertical line test. That means you draw a straight vertical line up and down, and it can only touch once, okay? So this one is a function because it only crosses that graph once, right here. This one is not a function because it crosses at the top and the bottom. So this one is not. This one also is not because it crosses at the top and the bottom. So again, for number 2, if you missed it, you should have everything on this page written down. Also, if you missed number 2, I want you to write down the following 8 problems and do like I just did. You can put function or not a function. So pause it, do these 8 problems. Also, if you missed number 2, write down what you think the correct answer should have been and why you missed it.